Welcome back to Swine TV, a special series with Dr. Joe Connor from Carthage Veterinary Service. Welcome back to the program, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about ASF in Vietnam and how it compares to the US market. So, Joe, let's get right to it. What's the current overview of ASF in Vietnam?
Yeah, ASF is quite active again this year. It actually entered the country in 2020, settled down a little bit in 2021, has more recently become active, particularly as they enter what they call their rainy season.
And then what about in the US currently?
Well, in the US currently, fortunately, we remain ASF negative. Our industry continues to put tremendous effort into preventive steps that will hopefully stop that virus from entering our swine production. But those efforts need to continue and certainly will continue.
So why is the ASF in Vietnam important to people in the US? Is it to monitor trends or anything else that we should be familiar with, Joe?
Yeah, Jim, importantly, we have been able to participate in both research studies and then vaccine studies, directed the research studies through SHIC, where we looked at the transmission of the virus being diagnosed by collection of oral fluids, which we expect would be a method that would be important here. But as one thinks about the virus and the lack of transmission, except in quite short distances, then raises the question of, at least in early infections, are oral fluids a good method of identifying early diagnosis when the virus enters a pig population? Or, since those pigs are frequently recumbent, would the index cases not actively chew on oral fluids? So that participation is quite helpful for our industry as a whole. And then more recently, a USDA-based gene-deleted vaccine was one of the vaccines that was being utilized and is being utilized in pig populations within that country today.
What is your take on what's happening in Vietnam?
One of the things that I found quite interesting is that at least the new facilities have put up really strong intensive biosecurity measures that we frequently think about here today, but even more intense. So the new farms have walls that are about 10 feet tall, generally lined with a barbed wire to prevent intrusion. The feed bins are on the perimeter. The facilities have offloading facilities for movement of animals, truck washes, biodries. But having said that, they still have some different risks than what we anticipate here, Jim. And some of the important ones would be that even though at least I think about Vietnam as being a wet country with quite high rainfall, there is about 6 months of the year where they're quite dry, at least in the pig areas. So they actually collect the rainwater during the off season in plastic lined containers or lagoon types so that they can use that during the dry season. But having said that, that would be a source of contamination. Secondly, they are able to sell the manure, and so it's very common for them yet today to collect feces every day from the primarily gestating and lactating sows, put that in 50 to 60 pound bags and sell that then to the local farmers as a method of fertilization for both the crops and the forest. Assuming then with ASF that virus would be present, then that would be another method of contamination back into the area. The third aspect would be on dead animal disposals. There's some laxity in terms of how those are managed. The new farms tend to be burying those pigs in containers, but at some point they'll need to empty those containers. The other things that might be in parallel to what we do here in the U.S. would be the truck washes, the bio dries or the TAD systems, the showering entry barriers, and the supply entry barriers are very similar to what we would have here today.
That's good. Good way of breaking it down, Joe. Is there any other similarities or differences that you care to note?
A key difference is that 99% of their pigs are still sold through the wet market, and even the larger companies would deliver to a commingled wet market every day of the week. So that makes it important to have these separated or transfer stations between the farm and the slaughter pig buying station. And I think if you just think about the numbers, it's somewhat astonishing to think that remains a very common procedure for 99% of the transfer of live pigs to consumers.
So again, when we talk about ASF in general, in Vietnam or in the US, is there any breaking news or anything else we should watch out for, or another key piece of advice, Joe?
There are a number of companies that are working and have been working for years on vaccines. Vietnam is a country that just recently this spring released use of vaccine, and most of the pigs that have received the vaccine are now probably in that 80 to 100 day age. And so it'll be quite important to follow the outcome of those really larger populations that are now or more recently been vaccinated. Both of those vaccines that are being used there are modified live vaccines, one of them being, as I mentioned, the gene-deleted vaccine that was developed in a combination here with our USDA research group. And so important that we follow the outcome of those quite closely.
What about for you, Dr. Connor? Any updates, personally, professionally? How are things going?
Things are going quite well. As you're aware, it's quite challenging in the industry from a profit loss standpoint. And I think it's quite interesting that globally that is very similar, with only maybe one or two exceptions.
So we just keep on doing the right things, and it'll work out, right, Joe?
Yeah, it's you just continue to look at the key cost drivers and look at protecting margins when those opportunities exist, and keep helping the industry move through this time period.
Dr. Joe Connor, thank you for joining us today on the update for ASF in Vietnam in comparison to the US.
Very welcome. Thanks, Jim, for the invitation.